Hello and welcome to Florida Basketball Hour. I am Neil Blackmon, Saturday Down South. On this episode, going to get into the schedule, man. It's been a while. It took a little while for Florida's to come out. Even when we got it, there's some bureaucratic stuff that has a couple of these games as TBA. We actually know one of them is Georgia Tech. There's a game in Jacksonville that's going to be the following weekend in December. I'll get into that. That one, we don't even know who the opponent is, and everybody's pretty quiet over there about it, everybody being in the basketball building. But otherwise, you saw Florida Basketball Hours on Twitter. We've been releasing a couple of these games as they come out, but now everything is finalized, including the SEC schedule. Obviously, start times, tip times, not complete at this point, but the SEC schedule is out. I think with an experienced basketball team, like one overarching thought is that it sets up pretty favorably for Florida. Typically, you might grimace a bit at a SEC schedule that's really heavily front-loaded in January. I remember with some of the Mike White teams, that had to reinvent their offenses over and over again in January. Was that like 3 straight years that Mike White was changing the offense at the beginning of league play? And then if Florida had a tough January, they were essentially out of the SEC race by January 31st. You would rather be an experienced basketball team. Generally, get old, stay old is back. We heard that was kind of dead letter for at least a couple years there at the beginning of the NIL era. And then with the portal combined with NIL, get old, stay old, came back into fashion. That's how Virginia won a national title. That's how Billy Donovan built a national power. And that is how Todd Golden will now chase a 3rd consecutive 1 seed. And as a result, a front-loaded SEC schedule I don't think is terribly challenging, for the Gators. Not to say that, it won't be difficult. Florida's January, though. At Texas, January 2nd. Oklahoma, a flex game, either the 5th or the 6th. It will depend on TV. Vanderbilt, the first SEC home weekend game on January 9th. A road slate the following week. Etna State, flex 12th, 13th of January. And then Alabama on the 16th in Tuscaloosa, a weekend game up there. Then Texas A&M in Gainesville, at Georgia, at Tennessee. That is Florida's January. So I would point out that in January, the Gators have 5 road games against just 3 home games. And all of those road games are in venues where Florida has at least 1 loss under Todd Golden or is going to be playing a team that should be ranked, with the exception of Mississippi State, January 12th, 13th, where Florida has played well in the Golden era. Florida has lost at Alabama under Golden. Florida has never won an SEC conference opener under Todd Golden, 0-4. I think one of the weirdest stats in college basketball right now. Playing at Texas, I think the presumptive second best team in the SEC, as we dive right in to the SEC schedule analysis, could put Florida at 0-5. That's going to be an extremely difficult first game for Florida, a tough one for them to win. And then you have at Georgia on the 23rd. Obviously, Florida lost to Georgia in the national title season up in Athens. And then at Tennessee, a place Todd Golden has never won, a place that Florida almost never wins. The Gators do get a bye before that trip to Tennessee. But I think the reality is, as far as opening 8-game slates go, that's almost the first half of league play will be over by the end of January. Hard to believe. But that's where Florida will sit. On January 31st, they'll be almost halfway done with conference play, and the Gators will be almost certainly, a team that's lost a game, maybe 2 games, and you might not think that. You might think, with all this experience, with over 80% of your experience coming back as is, and the potential for even more historic production coming back if Denzel Aberdeen is cleared and gets a waiver, this is a team that could run the table in the SEC. That's not going to happen. Prepare yourself for that. Florida's going to lose a basketball game this year. They're going to lose 2 basketball games this year. They might even lose 3 or 4 SEC games this year. 1 or 2 of those losses is coming at the front of league play. And I think Florida just kind of has to weather that storm. They've got to weather that month. But with an experienced team, I think you can do it. You look at that Texas game, for example, and I would point out that, in my view, the Texas Longhorns are almost unequivocally the winner of the offseason in the SEC other than Florida, right? Like, I think when you look at what Texas has brought, right, and I'm not you're going to see a team that's going to have extremely high expectations as is. And you're going to see a team that has players that, in their front court, at least in David Punch, who have played extremely well against Florida, period. Obviously, David Punch and TCU beat Florida last year, so it's not like he's going to be particularly intimidated by Florida's front court. Mataskovitis, the front court depth that Sean Miller has brought in can push the Gators in a way that almost nobody in the country can do. But they'll still be gelling, right? And Sean Miller's team is not like, their non-conference schedule was pretty interesting. Like, they did not schedule in a way that you might schedule when you know for sure you're going to be awesome. There is a chance that they're pretty battle tested, right? They have Baylor early on in San Antonio, and then they go into the Rady's Children Invitational in San Diego, where Florida played last year, and they'll get Georgetown, who is getting better under Ed Cooley, and then they'll get St. Mary's first year post Randy Bennett, or UCLA. And if they get Georgetown and UCLA, and one of those teams ends up being top 20 good, then great. But otherwise, their two best games are Louisville, who's going to be really good at the KFC Yum Center in the ACC-SC Challenge, and then Miami, which will be a common opponent with Florida, who they play in the Toyota Center in Houston on December 12th. I think when you look at that, you have to say, it's just going to be kind of a step up for Texas that they haven't had, whereas Florida is going to play Duke. Obviously, they're going to play Miami. They're going to potentially play Houston. The Gators are going to be pretty battle-tested, plus pretty experienced, plus a motivated Todd Golden team has typically played pretty damn well in road games in the past. But that'll be a marquee one, right? We don't get College game day on January 2nd in basketball. If we did, they'd be in Austin, Texas. That's going to be fantastic. And if Florida does somehow win, Oklahoma's winnable. Then you get Vanderbilt, a very, very good team that I'm extremely high on, that I think is underrated, that I think should be in any offseason winner conversation because they improved from a front court standpoint, and it'll be a more balanced Vanderbilt team. And it's great to have that as your home opener, home weekend opener. I will say Garth Glissman and the SEC office did an awesome job, again, just scheduling from a broader standpoint, but they certainly helped Florida. Florida was always going to have a tough road slate, and, they do. They play at Texas. They play at Alabama. They play at Tennessee, and all of those games there's no return trip except for Texas. They play at Arkansas, no return trip. But, Florida didn't get cheated under any stretch of the imagination. I mean, the home weekend tilts are awesome, right? You get Oklahoma in midweek, you get A&M in midweek, but you get Vanderbilt at home on a weekend. You get the return game against Texas at home on a weekend. You get a Missouri team that I think fits really well together and returns some experience. You get Trent Pierce back. You add Bryson Tiller to that mix. And I think Dennis Gates is a guy who has scheduled ambitiously. He thinks his team is going to be pretty darn good. You get Georgia at home on a weekend in a rivalry game, and then you get Kentucky on Senior Day, which is just fantastic. The idea that Florida – the 2014 Senior Day game is the one that everybody that has watched this program for a long time remembers, because it was Pat Young, it was Will Yigette, it was Casey Prather, it was Scotty Wilbekin. It was those guys playing together for the last time. There's that iconic photo, if you're in the bowels of the O-Dome, of the four of them walking off the court together and the confetti that has come down on the court because they, had won the SEC and finished the perfect regular season in the ACC. And there's some streamers on the floor. I don't know if it was confetti, but a pretty iconic picture of how they all walked off together all at once. Florida gets their rival in basketball, their biggest rival in basketball, Kentucky. They get them on senior night. These are the two best programs in the SEC historically. These are the two best programs in the SEC this century. You get a chance to play them in the final game. Scott Strickland won't necessarily be handing out packs of Kleenex on the way in, but you couldn't ask for more. If you're Thomas Houck, if you're Alex Kahn, and if you're Urban Klavzar, who I think could come back for a fifth year, but it may not, right, under 5 for 5. If you're Denzel Aberdeen, you get a waiver, you're Denzel Aberdeen, Ruben Chinyelu. If you're one of the seniors that Florida will honor on senior night, you couldn't ask for more than a arch rival on your home floor, potentially the way the schedule sets up, a chance to clinch the SEC or a chance to clinch a 1 seed, however that ends up working out. It's just spectacular. It's just spectacular. It's theater and poetry and what a way to close that out. But I do think, again, January is the toughest month. Let's look at the February. You got South Carolina and Texas, a 2-game homestand. This is a stretch where Florida gets 3 of 4 at home. You go to Neville on February 9th and 10th. I think Florida will have revenge on their mind after getting waxed by Auburn a little bit in the O-Dome last year. You get Missouri at home. Again, I love that there's only one Missouri game. Florida's had their issues in Columbia, that those long road trips are tough. You have at LSU. We don't know what Will Wade's team is going to look like. LSU pretty clearly like the loser in the SEC in the offseason. Do I think if 5 for 5 becomes a thing that they'll get it sorted out? Yeah. But, Yamadar are going to play in Israel, as it turns out. The NCAA has, I guess, hinted that he won't be eligible, so he's decided not even to try anymore. RJ Lewis is contesting it. He's going to lose. He won't be eligible. So just they're going to have eligibility issues. They don't have a point guard. Their best player is arguably Mo Diabate, who's a career SEC role player. A lot of problems with that roster as constructed. Does not mean it will stay that way. But, when you look at that particular road game in February, you're suddenly thinking, man, there's a chance to really go on a heater if Florida wins at Auburn on February 9th or 10th with the flex. Then you come home and you got Georgia and you got Ole Miss. So February starts out actually with 5 of 7 for the Gators in Gainesville. They should heat up victories. And then Florida goes to Arkansas on February 27th. And again, I think we'll have immense SEC title implications if Arkansas is as good as I think they can be. On paper, I like that roster even more than I like Texas, just from a talent standpoint. But if I'm talking coaching and talent, I still like Tennessee's roster and coaching. I still like Texas's roster and coaching better than I like Arkansas. But Arkansas is going to have a lot of front court bodies. And I think the key this year with Florida, and circle this it's July 29th. So circle it now. The key with Florida is not going to be, hey, does their front court deliver? I think Boogie Flant's going to take a jump. And I think Urban Klavzar is still the SEC 6th man of the year. I think that they lose Xavion Lee, but between Alex Lloyd and Isaiah Brown, they're going to be fine at the 2. If Denzel Aberdeen is declared eligible, they're going to be spectacular at the 2. You have CJ Ingram as another kind of option. Florida's going to be pretty multiple in the backcourt, and as long as Boogie Flant is healthy, they're going to be really good back there. The key to playing Florida and beating Florida this season, last year was, can you force the guards to beat you? Can you neutralize Chinyelu, right? Iowa. This year it's going to be, do you have the bodies to just throw at Florida's front court, right? Iowa had quite a bit of depth. I mean, they had enough front court bodies to where they could test the Gators. Missouri, same way. So Arkansas has done that. They've built it. There's nobody on Arkansas's front court in their roster that you like, I would take that guy over any of Florida's first three front court players, right? And even the two young guys, the five-star from Europe and Caleb Orajuo, who has just reclassified. Like, you're not taking freshman four-star bigs over any of Florida's bigs, of course. But having those bodies matters, right? You don't get into the Malachi Moreno situation that Kentucky was in last year in Gainesville, where they tightened the game and then Moreno got into foul trouble and, Mark Pope was old Mother Hubbard and only Nikola Vujcevic was in the cupboard, right? Like, you don't want to be kind of in that situation. You have to be able to roll out bodies. Certainly Arkansas is going to be able to do that. And then Florida closes at South Carolina, senior night for the Gamecocks, and then Kentucky at home, as we discussed. We'll get into the non-conference in a minute. A couple other cool SEC scheduling notes. The SEC has done a really cool thing in featuring their rivalries and then also cultivating big-time weekend matchups after football ends. I like both these things a lot. I love the slate on the final weekend of the SEC tournament, where you have Alabama at Auburn, Iron Bowl of basketball. You have Ole Miss at Miss State, Egg Bowl of basketball. You have Texas A&M. Could be a huge, huge bubble-licious type game for the Aggies if they're who I think they're going to be. Kentucky at Florida, obviously. Tennessee at Vanderbilt. Just massive rivalry games, which I think, that really does honor the sport. And it celebrates what the league has become in basketball, and obviously it's strong. I think it's going to be the best league in the sport this year. The early kind of Torvik-y projections actually don't have Florida at number one, by the way, because they don't factor in an Aberdeen waiver yet. They have Florida at 3, but it should be noted that, when you look at the 2027 projected conference ratings, if you iron those out, the SEC is going to be top. The SEC is going to be the top, whereas the Big Ten was clearly the top last year. So I think when you start to look at early analytical projections, this is a league that's going to be the best league in college basketball, even if, again, sort of similar to last year, the super strength of the SEC is going to be spots like 10 to 20. As opposed to 1 to 10, where it's going to be like Florida and maybe Texas. But 10 to 20 could be chock full of SEC teams. There aren't going to be many nights off, especially on the road. So that's special. Let's talk about the non-con. The home opener will be November 5th. The Gators will play JU in Gainesville. Florida also has mid-major home tilts with Milwaukee, Vermont, and then Merrimack among teams that you would be pretty familiar with from a college basketball standpoint. Charlie Ward and Florida A&M will visit on December 21st. The Gators play the Long Island Sharks in their final non-con home game, December 29th, but not a ton of bye games for the Gators. Those are sort of your bye game feast. Obviously, the marquee one is the December 1st tilt with Duke. Good luck getting a ticket to that if you're not a season ticket holder. I think resale markets are already going to be in the $800 to $900 range, and then if you want to sit first level, it's going to be even more than that. But $800 to $900 for that second level, that 100 level seating. Good luck. And then Florida State, the one true road game, that will be November 10th in Tallahassee. Obviously, you've got the Players Era, November 17th through the 19th. So Florida will finally get a Thanksgiving at home, which I know a lot of the staff members are very much looking forward to. They'll play Milwaukee on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving and then take a break and not play for a week before taking on the Blue Devils on December 1st. December 12th is a neutral site game that's been ironed out. That'll be in Orlando at the Kia Center against Georgia Tech. And then December 18th, that following Friday, they will play someone in Jacksonville. That one remains TBA. But that is the non-conference slate for the Gators. We will have a Patreon on the non-conference slate. And remember, the best way to support the show is to go to patreon.com/FloridaBB Hour and subscribe. One of 3 levels is going to get you pretty much any sort of membership that you might like. Again, if you go to patreon.com/FloridaBB Hour, subscribe at any level. An annual subscription is a little cheaper, but if you want to start with a monthly and just see if you like it, you're going to get most everything at either the second membership tier, that's the Rowdy Reptile tier, or the 6-man club tier. Everything from Eric Fawcett and myself that's exclusive to you all. It's Gator coverage you're not going to get anywhere, from interviews, exclusive interviews, to game-by-game analysis, to film studies. It's the best way to support us still. The other way to support us is to go to our podcast sponsor, Game Time Sidekicks. Those guys are awesome. It's just kind of like a Yeti situation, going to keep you warm and as cold as a Yeti. Perfect to visit for football season as we get ready for game day in the John Summerall era in Gainesville. The SEC collection is the largest collection at Game Time Sidekicks. You'll definitely want to go over there. If you spend $60 or more, you'll get a skinny can and a koozie of your choice over there just by listening to Florida Basketball Hour. So that's a pretty good deal. When you look at the Florida collection, they got everything. They got everything from your sort of more feminine type Yetis to your national championship basketball. They've still got a few of those tumblers. There's a 40-ounce one that I think is exquisite for game day. There are, again, multiple national championship ones. You got your more 12 to 16-ounce tumbler type coffee mugs. Anyway, they're great. I'm not repping let me rep my other school here. I've got one right here. This is the Game Time Sidekicks North Carolina one, but you can see that if you have if there's a type of style you want, they're going to have it at GameTimeSidekicks.com. So go check out Game Time Sidekicks. Support those guys. Another great way to show your support for Florida Basketball Hour. Now, promised some SEC power rankings with the show. A few people hit me up and were like, hey, we'd love you to give us some thoughts on kind of where you are on rosters as we dive into the year. Like, what do you think? So I have the Gators at the top. I just think this is a chance to be kind of an iconic and historic defense in college basketball. There's a chance that honestly, if Boogie Flan stays healthy and Zay Brown takes the jump I think he takes, there is a chance this is the best defense this decade in college basketball, which is going to put it high on the list of KenPom defenses, because 4 of the top 5 defenses in the KenPom era have come in the last 10 years. I think Florida has a chance to be that good defensively. So we'll see. A lot of it's going to depend on Flan, and then the Aberdeen waiver will matter because if Aberdeen doesn't get the waiver, the Clavsar plays more and you lose a little bit of your backcourt tenacity defensively. But chance to be historically good defensively. The Gators are easily my number 1. My number 2 is going to be Texas. I think when you look at Texas heading into this season, you've got a real chance offensively in particular to be spectacular. When you have Mattis Vokatitis and you have David Punch, you're going to be pretty filthy down low. Obviously, they lose Dalen Swain. That's a gut punch, but I love what they've done elsewhere. I also think Sean Miller's got a big team that could be pretty imposing on the glass outside of just Vocatitis, which I think was an issue last year. It doesn't just have to be Vocatitis and punch, getting rebounds. And then the question is really going to be like, how much offense do they get from Isaiah Johnson? Like, does he continue to get to the free throw line at the prolific rate that he did a year prior, or is there an adjustment in the SEC? What's his usage rate? Austin Gooseby, how much do they get out of that young, talented freshman? And then their wings, Elijah Freeman, Amari Evans, like, what do those guys offer in the absence of Dalen Swain? Because I really think a lot of times last year when possessions broke down, Swain was such a mismatch that they could just attack with him, and then Vocatitis would clean things up. Still, going to be a better offensive team than they are a defensive team, but better defensively, better as a rebounding team than they were a year ago. Clearly the SEC's second-best team. I have Tennessee as my 3. It's the combination of talent and coaching for me. I really like, the backcourt. I think Juke Harris is a guy who was not particularly efficient at Wake Forest, but will be asked to do less at Tennessee, and that will put him in a good place. Day-Day Ames, a guy who I think will fit a role better with more talented players around him, but was still very good at Cal. Terrence Hill Jr. is a bulldog, that kind of classic guard your point guard. Rick Barnes, tough guy, maybe the most Rick Barnes fit of the backcourt additions. Look, if Dwayne Brown II is in foul trouble, there maybe are some front court questions with this group. They're going to be a little smaller than we're used to. But, this is still going to be a really good offensive team with multiple offensive weapons, which I like. I like that idea of not having to rely so much on a Chaz Lanier or a Dalton Connect. As good as those guys were, the idea that you can spread it out a little more, and then you've got a rim protector like Miles Rubin to complement Dwayne Brown. Like if you keep those two on the floor, you've got a real chance. Ralph Scott should be another impact freshman, classic Barnes. And then Jalen Harrelson was a really efficient player who I liked a lot at Notre Dame, transfers in back south. He's an Orlando kid. Good player. Should round out that schedule nicely. 4th, I have Arkansas. I trust the talent more than I trust the Alabama roster build. But, they still need that front court to actually produce like it can. They have all the bodies. Who produces? Does Mika Muradin produce? Does Cooper Bowser produce? Does Caleb Ariju justify reclassifying by being a guy you can play 10 to 12 minutes? What do they get out of Paolo Samito? Like, I think these are all fair questions, because I think with Jordan Smith, you're not going to have Darius Acuff, but you're going to have a highly talented player who is extremely capable, right, in your backcourt. Billy Richards should take a jump. And then what do you get from J.J. Andrews as a freshman? What do you get from Abdou Toure? Like, the talent, you can look back in 10 years and be like, man, there were 6 NBA guys on that Arkansas team. It's how does the sum, is the sum as great as the individual parts? Sometimes with Cal teams it isn't. I still trust this team to be a team that kind of figures it out come NCAA tournament time, but it could be a long, slow build for them. Alabama, we don't know necessarily Aiden Holloway's status. They need him because I think even with Jackson Richardson as a highly recruited freshman, Amari Allen is a flow of the game player. He's not going to be sort of like Thomas Houck. Like, you can't just run a play for Amari Allen when you need a bucket. And so that's your best player. It kind of becomes a question of like, what else do you get? Do they get an impact out of Cole Clower, who was committed to NC State and now is Alabama bound? What do they get front court wise? Like, they are bigger than they have been with Drew Fielder, Jamarius Davis Fleming, London Jamison, Brandon Garrison. Like, they have front court bodies. What do they get out of those bodies? There's not a ton of experience proven front court production, but they're still going to be great offensively. Are they better at protecting the rim? Are they better on the glass than they have been? They brought in the bodies. What does Nate Oates get out of those bodies, right? Again, like teams have reacted to Florida, which is the greatest compliment you can get. If you're Todd Golden and Jonathan Safire, Carlin Hartman, and the people that put together Florida's roster, is that people are trying to match you. There was an article on Rammer Jammer, I think it was, or one of the Crimson Tide websites that was like Nate Oates responds to Florida. And like the idea that Nate Oates, who is part of sort of the revolution of the SEC, from middling parochial backwater basketball league to national power, is now responding to the innovative hub that is Gainesville's basketball building, is pretty wild. But that's where we are, right? Everybody is loading up on front court bodies because Florida won the league by 3 games and they won the national title the year before with an indomitable front court. And, obviously, yes, they had Walter Clayton Jr., Elijah Martin, Will Richard. Well, I think Florida, may never have that type of backcourt again, but I also think that's the best backcourt in the SEC this century, right? So the question for Florida is just like our Flynn, Klavjar, Lloyd, Aberdeen, Ingram, Zay, like, is that a cut above last year's backcourt? And I think it will be. And then, yes, like Hauk's going to get better. Condon's going to get better. Chenulu's going to get better. Like, is it leaps and bounds better? No, but Florida wins at the margins. And like, if these little efficiency margins are better, again, we're talking about a Florida team with a chance, if they're healthy, to be historically in that upper echelon of teams you talk about as being some of the better teams ever, right? But they got to go do it. You got to go compete, and you got to go do it. It's not going to be given to you. And, teams are responding to that. Vanderbilt, I have 6th. I probably should put them above Alabama, honestly, because I like their roster better. But that's me trusting Nate Oates. Not that I don't trust Mark Byington. I do think Mark Byington's team is going to defend really well this year. I think Chandler Bing could be one of the SEC's breakouts players. I loved what they did in the portal, adding T.O. Barrett, adding Sebastian Williams-Adams, who's a kid who really just competes and doesn't need to score and can guard. Bangot Doc is a big who can stretch you a little bit. I don't think he can put it on the floor as much as Mark Byington's going to lie all offseason about him being able to do, but he can play. I think Jaden Leverett is a freshman who's going to play a little bit for them. And then obviously you build all that around Tyler Tanner, your All-American. That's a really good roster, man. And you see why like the top of the SEC might be so formidable. I have Kentucky at my 7 and Missouri at my 8. I thought Kentucky is the most interesting one to me because even though I'm going to pick them 7th right now, maybe I'll move them up as we get closer to SEC Media Days in October. But when you think about where they were in early May, where you didn't know if Malachi Moreno was going to stay in the draft, where you didn't know if Milan Momcilovic was going to stay in the draft, and you certainly didn't think Milan Momcilovic was going to end up in Kentucky, right? There was all the talk about Florida first, and I think Florida probably had a plan there if Hauk didn't return. And you looked at the roster, and you're like, what is this group, right? Now you've got Momcilovic, so you've got the spacer that I think Mark Pope needed terribly last year and didn't have, and to run his off-ball stuff. And then you've got Zoom Diallo, who excels at what? Getting into the paint and finding teammates, right? You've got Cam Williams, who's a glue guy. They've always had one at Kentucky, so it's not true that like they don't have a glue guy, but Cam Williams fills the Diabate role in that he doesn't need to score to impact winning. The big questions with them are like, how is Alex Wilkins a fit with Diallo, right? Like, does he need the ball a ton? How does Momcilovic accept the shooter's role, or is he trying to do more things to impress NBA scouts? Do they play Trent Noah, who can really shoot, or do they not care about that as much? How does Justin McBride fit in as a guy who we know can be impactful defensively, but isn't particularly efficient. Like the roster fits are still a little strange, honestly, but they're in a much better place than they were where I would have picked them in the bottom half. I have Missouri at 8. I told you I like Missouri's roster. I think Dennis Gates has scheduled like he thinks he's going to be good. And, I love adding Bryson Tiller to this group with Trent Pierce. I think Jason Crow Jr., your 5-star freshman, is a guy who's going to get you 14, 15 points a game. He's an absolute bucket. And then they've surrounded those guys with role players, right? Kennard Davis Jr., Jalen Carey, those guys at step roles. He's still going to have bodies to throw at Florida when they play. So a team that very easily could finish better than 8th, but I have to put them in the top half. And then, to the extent we have to talk about the rest of the league, I really like I'm so torn on like whether I like Auburn or Georgia better. If Georgia hadn't lost Somto Sorrell, I would have them top 6. Because they lost Somto Sorrell, and it's like, what are they going to do inside? And how does James Scott take the kind of leap he showed at the end of the year last year at Ole Miss? That's a big question for me, because with Blue Cane, Smurf Millender, like that's a good backcourt, period. As long as those guys are healthy. Now you have Kimo Millender in too. And then like Kenan Catchings is a guy who could sneak into the lottery if he blossoms the way Mike White talks about him and they think he can. Freddie DeLone, I think, is not a great player, honestly, like kind of a weird take, a guy who might struggle to adjust to SEC basketball, but I don't think they need him to be awesome, right? It's just, are they big enough? That's the question with them. And then Auburn, almost similar. Like I think a team that's really going to score with Tahad Pettiford, and Kevin Overton can shoot it, and I think you're going to get plenty of production offensively. But what do they look like on the defensive side of the basketball? How well is Mantas Rubas-Vicious ready to defend? How well do the bigger wings like Adam Olson adjust to SEC basketball? Those are questions I have, where you have a lot of guys with high offensive potential. Owen Freeman, another. What do they bring on the defensive side of the court? I've got them in that 10 spot. Oklahoma extends Porter Noser in theory only, right? Not necessarily a guy who is going to be guaranteed another year. I have them at 11. I love Darion Reed. I think he's an all-league player. Pop Isaacs, is a guy that has been around the SEC. People are familiar with. Xavier Brown, same deal. Like, Dalton Forsythe is a dude they got quality minutes from late in the year last year. Is there enough top-end talent there to break into the top 10 and get to the NCAA tournament and have Porter Moser keep his job? We'll see. I have them. I still trust that roster more than I trust Texas A&M's roster. Even if Mackenzie Mbako and PJ Haggerty are healthy, I think that the rest of the roster is a host of question marks. They've got some G League guys that they're hoping will get eligible. We'll see how it goes. They're going to be small again. And I'm not sure how long Bucky McMillan is going to keep trying to roll out a team that isn't very big and compete in a league where everybody's trying to be big. They're going to get beat up on the glass a lot of nights. And I'm not saying it's going to be a long season in College Station. I am saying it's going to be a bubblicious one. And then the rest of the league, you've got Ole Miss, Miss State, South Carolina, bundle them up however you will, and LSU. Bundle them up however you will. Reserve the right to move LSU around depending on the 5-for-5 rulings. They're the team that's going to have the roster space to kind of do that. South Carolina's going to have a little flexibility too. They, for instance, could bring on like an actual rotational player through 5-for-5. And I think if I'm Lamont Paris, I would love to do that because you coach at South Carolina in men's basketball to get fired, but you're not going to find a much better coach than Lamont Paris. And therein is the problem that South Carolina has. I've mentioned it multiple times. When Colin Hartman leaves, Lamont Paris is the kind of guy who just from an X and O and development standpoint would fit beautifully at Florida as an assistant. I don't think he wants to get to where he's trying to get an assistant's job back in the Big Ten, but he's going to be a coveted assistant when he's fired at South Carolina. Does that happen now or does that happen later, right? With 5 for 5 and the rulings that could come allowing the class of 2022 the eligibility that they should have. In all honesty, we'll see. But I think certainly very, very possible that they could add pieces. LSU will add pieces no matter what. They're not going to get Yamadar. They're not going to get RJ Lewis. So the kind of question becomes, what do they get? What does that roster look like? We don't know yet. We're going to find out. But that's where Florida is. Aberdeen, I know people are going to say, please address that. Go to patreon.com/FloridaBBHour to watch the video where I talk more in detail on that. I still think Aberdeen's going to get eligible. He should get a waiver anyway. There is an actual St. Joseph's player from a year ago who I think is the best example of someone who has gotten a waiver based on minimal freshman year competition. And so it's not like it would be unprecedented for Denzel Aberdeen to get that anyway, considering they quite literally just gave one to Justice Ashigabar last year, and then he was A10 Defensive Player of the Year. He played 36 minutes at Harvard as a freshman and received a season of competition waiver. By the way, I saw someone look up some AI stuff on the Ashigabar waiver as if I haven't read the pleading at the waiver application. And Ashigabar tried to claim an injury and a medical hardship waiver, which was rejected because he played at the end of the year and the injury didn't actually cause him to miss substantive time. He got a season of competition waiver because he played minimally as a freshman at Harvard. So very similar to the Aberdeen one, but we've seen countless times where the NCAA gives one for one reason and then rejects almost the same set of facts and circumstances for another reason. We'll see what happens with Aberdeen on the actual waiver. Even if he doesn't get it, I think he'll get a TRO to play another year based on the 5 for 5 rulings that have come out in Ohio. I expect the Texas and Tennessee plaintiffs will do well as well. It's arbitrary to deny the class of 2022, who all fit the plain language of the 5 for 5 rule, eligibility simply because they just finished their 4th year. That's stupid, especially when you're giving the next year eligibility. So that's where we're at on 5 for 5 and Denzel Aberdeen. Subscribe to Patreon if you want more of that stuff. Florida schedule is out. We're 99 days from college basketball. We're even closer to the start of another college football era in Gainesville. I know a lot of you are optimistic. I hope you're right. Go Gators. Keep attacking closeouts.